So why don't we just start telling your story? And so you first went to Madagascar. What year was that?
The story started with the crocodiles. When you work on crocodile, it's very complicated to work for conservation of crocodiles, because when you talk about lemurs, sometimes nobody cares about it. But when you talk about crocodiles, people said, I want to get rid of them. And they have an ecological role, very important ecological role. When I started to work in Central Africa in 1988. I made a survey of the number of people injured by crocodiles. I ended up finding out that there was about 100 people being killed this year, 1988, by crocodiles. When you talk about conservation, it's pretty complex. People say, what the are you talking about? What I say to the people, if the cars are causing lots of death in United States and Europe, and we still keep them because they're useful. So the idea was to bring the crocodiles to be useful. And so what I did is that they wanted me to set up farms because there was over harvesting of crocodiles in the wild. They were hunting before. And so I said, why don't we set up crocodile farms? But this is of no interest to me. I think the crocodiles have a role to play in the wild, so we should keep them in the wild. And luckily, I was the head of the UN project, so nobody knew anything about crocodiles, so they had no choice to listen to me. And so that's where I set up a system. Instead of having adult crocodile that you would put in a farm like you would have a pig farm, I said, no, we're going to leave the crocodiles in the wild, and I am going to train the local communities living by the side of the crocodile to collect the eggs. It's a bit technical, you should not move the eggs. And I trained some staff and I trained the people, to collect the eggs. And then we were coming with a light aircraft every year, it's a breeding season, to buy the eggs from the local communities. And that was incredible because it worked. At the end of the day, the people were happy to sell the eggs, and so they were happy to have dangerous animals around them because at least they were bringing in money. I worked 1.5 years on the project and it lasted for 20 years. But when I finished it, the first phase, the UN asked me, Olivier, don't you have another idea? And that's where I said to him, listen, the forests are burning in Madagascar for nothing, just for a little bit of ash, for so poor agriculture. It's nonsense. But okay, that time, there were just these campaigns, by people from the city and WWF people saying, oh, don't cut the forest, don't kill the lemurs. What the give me food. And so I said, this is not going to work. If we wanted something to work, we have to bring value to the forest. That's all how it started.
So that people can make a living so they don't have to resort to the bad agriculture.
Exactly. They needed to make a living out of product, from the wild. So I started to work first on product from the forest because you needed to bring value from the forest. Otherwise, agriculture there's no point. And the first plant I found was Ravensara aromatica, because it was an endemic plant of Madagascar. So I said, this is cool. Let's organize production with the local community so they can make money out of the leaves of the tree and they won't chop down the trees. What we did with Chanel, we said, okay, we'll do the 60 kilos of leaves and you're going to pay a proper price, but not more. But we want you to fund some really social actions, that you want to talk about. And I remember one thing I said to Desange, who I was working with, is that, but what should we pay? And I said, listen, you have two photos that you're using. One of a top model that you paid $10,000 for a photo. And you're using at the same scale the photo of the woman collecting the flowers. What don't you give me $10,000 for that photo also?
Yeah.
And that was a good example, just because it's business. So I'd say you don't need to give the 10,000 to that woman specifically, but to the community at least.
Mm-hmm.